I'd like to talk about the idea of reparations here, and specifically reparations that are owed to African Americans. Now, it's kind of an interesting story because we can take it in a lot of directions. But let's look at the facts here, right? I myself am not a pure African. The average African American has about 20 to 40% of their DNA from European ancestry, and typically male ancestry. So, what that means is that 1 in 4 of our great grandfathers was a pure white person, a pure Caucasian. And it's very important because when we talk about who that 1 in 4 was, typically the person, that Caucasian who was able to parent black children, right, was someone who had access to black women. And you see where I'm going here. Typically, this was someone who owned land. These were the plantation owners. These were the wealthy. These were people who had the wherewithal to actually purchase and own slaves. And those are actually our great grandfathers. So when we're talking about reparations, we're not really talking about social justice. You can talk about social justice. You can talk about equality. You can even talk about race if you want to. But the real question is one of paternity. The question is, does America hold men responsible for their children? Because, me being the descendant, at least in part, of white Americans, and in particular, white Americans who were people of means, who had sex with my great great grandmothers, right? And then pretended that it never happened, walked away, deadbeat, and then allowed their descendants to live without an inheritance. While our cousins, who happen to be of a lighter hue, are walking around with our inheritance, living on the land that should have been divided among all the heirs, possession of the wealth, and so many other things that actually their own family has been denied because that other part of the family is of a darker hue. So let's talk about reparations. I mean, we can talk about it certainly from the point of view of Jim Crow and racial deprivation, and look at it from a class and racial point of view. But I think even more intimately, and most intimately, this is about family. The question is, will America hold men responsible for taking care of their families across generations? Will that generational wealth be protected for the heirs? Because African Americans are, because of the way we got over here, the vast majority of us are some of the oldest Americans. We were here, most of us, before the 1860s, most of us before the 1830s. So we are the illegitimate children of the founding fathers. And are those founding fathers deadbeat fathers? Well, let me tell you. The reason I understand this so intimately is because on my mother's side of the family, we actually had an ancestor who was anything but a deadbeat. The family owned a large plantation in Aquasco, Maryland, and somewhere around the 1830s, the white slave owner, male, had sex and children with a black slave woman, and the product of that union or that relationship was my triple great grandfather. And what he did, rather than the shameful thing that so many men were permitted and I dare say encouraged to do in terms of abandoning their family, the members of their family that looked a little different, he decided that that wasn't what he was going to do. He took a portion of his land in the northern part of Prince George's County and he gave it to his son, his mixed son. And that mixed son ended up passing on that land, which is still in our family today, as inheritance, the same way that has happened for other families across the racial line. But so I'm proud in my own way of my triple great grandfather who himself identified with the Confederacy. My great uncle was named after Robert E. Lee. But the reason that that was possible was because in our family, the members of the Confederacy had actually honored the black people who were part of their families. Now, one thing that my great great grandfather talked about, my grandmother shared this with me, was he said that, he was embarrassed because he knew that his cousins were not as responsible as he was and as his father had been. That they were deadbeats, that they had children just like everybody else. And their black heirs were walking around with nothing, living in old sheds in the woods with nothing, while their brothers and cousins were living in beautiful plantation homes. So the question is not about race or culture. Let's really talk about it. Does America value family? Does America value inheritance? When we talk about the founding fathers, do we actually honor the children of the founding fathers? All of them. When we talk about the sons and daughters of the Confederacy, many of the sons and daughters of the Confederacy are black like me. And the question is, do you really believe in family? Or are you the ones who are obsessed with race? So much so that you will deny your own descendants rather than acknowledge their birthright. That's the real question. What kind of men and women are you? And if you choose to be a deadbeat or continue, because the choice has been made by many, if you choose to continue to be a deadbeat, you have to understand the implications of that. Because people know. We know. I mean, I know what. I'm not the only black American, and we can do our ancestry DNA, and pretty much everybody who looks like me in America has 20%, roughly, European ancestry. So we know that our triple great great grandfathers were slave owners that had plantations, and that land is still our land, rightfully, because we're part of the family. So the question is, what is America going to do about that? And again, if America decides, well, family's not forever, our obligations to our children are really not that serious. Well, then just know that we're watching and the rest of the world is watching. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of cultures, my own included, that see men who abandon their children in a very different light. They're not really men.